yesterday, he said, oh, you're presenting at Minibar. What are you talking about? I said, Emacs. He goes, oh, those old computers from Mac. So this may be, which is a tall order, but this may be the nerdiest talk at the entire Minibar this year. So I commend you all for being here. And I think that to start off, we should do our obligatory survey. I kind of want to get an idea of what kind of editors we're all coming from. So let's see, who actually uses Emacs day to day? It's their go-to editor, sort of. That's good. And who is currently a VI Vim user? Very glad to have you here. You're really the target audience for this talk. As I didn't lie in my little blurb, this is not an attempt to convert you for Emacs. I actually don't think that most people should convert to Emacs, but I myself spent a lot of time in different editors. I think there's a lot to be learned by seeing how other editors do things, seeing the features, figuring out where you've been sort of constrained in your thinking by the environment you're using, and branch out. So there are some interesting things. There's even some Vim config code in this talk, so you have something to look forward to there. Okay, what else do we have? We have SublimeText, maybe, and TextMate, perhaps. Still using that? No. What else? Ed, Eclipse, IntelliJ. Some of you haven't responded. What are you guys using?
I'm here for the knowledge.
You're here for the knowledge?
Build the knowledge base. I haven't used Emacs before. Curious about it.
Okay. Any personal preferred editors that haven't mentioned? Okay. Oh.
So I'm more of a front-end developer, so I've been using like Notepad++, which I actually hate. But then I started using SublimeText.
Mm-hmm.
I actually really like that one. So I've been interested to see how this kind of compares to.
Yeah, SublimeText is very cool. It's probably what I'd be using if I wasn't using Emacs or Vim. Okay, well, let's get started. This is Emacs. Actually, we're looking at a slideshow, and I will grant you that my slides are ugly as sin, and there's a reason for that, and that's because I'm running the slideshow inside of Emacs. There is kind of a school of thought that once you dive into Emacs, you never leave the editor again and do absolutely everything in it. I don't actually subscribe to that school, but I thought that for the purposes of this talk, it might be fruitful. So I'm about to show you the most important thing about Emacs and what makes it interesting. So we're going to type some Lisp and evaluate it, and there it just happened. Did everybody see that? Let's try this. There it was. You can ooh and ah. No, there isn't actually an important concept here, and this is why I say Emacs is interesting as a type of software. So what I did is write the command next line and evaluate it in the editor. And so what does the command next line do? Well, Emacs has a way of figuring this out. There is the function help. It's going to default to the command I just ran called next line. And let's make that bigger. It tells me what next line does. Well, that's not particularly interesting, although I can also go and view the source of next line, which is kind of cool to be able to jump quickly. But the important thing is if we go back, there's also a help function that lets you figure out what a particular key does. I don't know why every editor on the planet doesn't have this function where I do the magic key combination and press the key I'm curious about, and it tells me what command it runs. I guess part of the problem is not all editors run their commands in a sort of unified fashion the way Emacs does. But what I did is I hit Control-HK, hit the down arrow. Now Emacs tells me what happens when I hit the down arrow. Well, I know what happens when I hit the down arrow. When I hit the down arrow, the cursor goes down. I'm doing it. I'm doing up 2. But what help tells me is that when I hit the down arrow, it's going to run the command next line. And what it does is, and then again, we'll see that it's defined here. So there's nothing up Emacs sleeves. Here's how next line. There's a lot of code involved in just going to the next line, but there you go. But there's absolutely no difference between pushing the down arrow and evaluating a line of code in Emacs that says next line. It's doing the same thing. And every single one of Emacs commands that you ever run is a function that's defined in Emacs that you can choose how you want to execute it, either through a key combination. And I mean every one, including something as simple as next line. And I don't have to...
How do you evaluate that line?
Control X, Control E evaluates. That's the default binding. You can pick your poison in that regard. Oh, and so you don't have to. People worry a lot about key bindings, and Emacs has a ton of them, and they're all very weird, and some of them are completely untypable by human hands. The good news is that every command that you can execute as a key binding, like down, is also executable by name. So there's this meta X thing. I actually don't. Meta is alt key on most modern computers. I don't like typing the alt key because it requires a little bit of pinky acrobatics, but you can remap that if you wish. So if I look for next line here and hit enter, it just happened. And this is a subtle but important point. Because I'm going to talk later about presenting a sort of unified interface and why that makes Emacs, what power that lends Emacs. But the point is here that there's nothing that is, nothing that's blocked, that's stored away inside of the depth of Emacs. Nothing that's not accessible to you as the user and as the developer. Everything is this unified, defining a function, binding it to a key potentially, and running it. And the entire editor is written in that way. And in fact, the secret sauce of Emacs is that it's just a very small amount of code written in C that you'll probably never look at that starts up a list process. And when you open Emacs, you're in a living, modifiable program. And when you configure Emacs, you're modifying that program to do what you want. And just to show you a little bit more of how that works, we're going to define next line. Interactive is the magic word that makes a function you define available for binding to keys and everything, rather than just an internal helper function for your program. So it's going to do next line. I think it takes an argument here. And whoops. And I've been programming closure, so I should write it that way. Okay. So now, next line goes down 2 lines, as expected. And this is, poor programming practice. I should document my function. So this line goes to the next line. Evaluate that. And now, just the way that I'd get documentation for every function within Emacs, I can look at next line. And here we have our documentation for it. It tells me what it does. If this was written in an actual file rather than in my presentation, it would have a link to the file where it's defined and all that good stuff. And so now it's I could bind it to a key. We'll say C6 and next line. And now if I press Control 6, it goes down 2 lines. So that is the sort of introduction to Emacs and what makes it different from pretty much not every other piece of software out there, but a lot of other software, is that you're in a sort of very different kind of environment that's kind of living and modifiable in a very core way. So my text is a little big. So part of the reason I want to give this talk is that I've been using Emacs for a while, and I was doing a presentation on database transactions and locking. And in order to enable that, I had two MySQL sessions open, and I had 2 sort of text files, each with a set of code, and I had a little sort of mini program set up where I could evaluate a code and send it to one or the other session so I could show how the 2 would deadlock and what circumstances the 2 would deadlock under. And I gave my presentation, and everybody was enlightened. And then somebody at the end of the presentation said, "Hey, wow, cool! What are you using to do what you're doing, sending code arbitrarily to sessions?" I said, "Oh, that's Emacs." And I got this sort of frown, and she completely lost interest. And that's the disappointing Emacs magic. And I would say that the one negative thing I will say about Vim users the entire day is that they're the only people that when I say that I'm an Emacs user actually sneer at me. And this happened as recently as this conference. I was walking down the hallway and I saw a friend of mine. He said, "Hey, what are you talking about?" And I said, "I'll be talking about Emacs." And he sneered at me. Not even joking. I said, "Oh, it's called Why Emacs?" And he said it should be called Why Bother. Anyway. But it is disappointing to see, you know, we all have limited time on our hands, and we like to try to pick the best tools for the job. And sometimes in order to do that, we decide in our minds that all the other tools must be inferior, so that our tool can be perfect, so we don't have to worry about those other tools. But it's disappointing that someone can get excited about an idea, find out that it's in a piece of software that they've already decided they've disregarded, and lose all interest. So, go ahead. Yes, there is a built-in debugger. I almost never use it, so I'm not going to present it. But yeah, there's something called EDB that's the Emacs list debugger, and it will step through the code. Yes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Emacs features. And I think when most people think about Emacs, they think about bloatware. So the question is Emacs bloatware? And for the answer, let's open up some of the documentation. This is how Emacs presents the documentation. One interesting thing, you'll notice there's a whole lot of chapters here. One thing that if you're looking closely, you will have noticed that one of the chapters here in the Emacs documentation is the Emacs chapter. So that should give you an idea of how incredibly bloated this piece of software is. If we go into Emacs, there are some chapters here. So in terms of features, if you're worried about feature parity with whatever, you're probably covered for anything to do with text editing. I'm actually not going to talk a whole lot about editing text today. I will actually get to it later for again, the VI people in the audience who are really, who hate Emacs for its lack of usability and its poor key bindings and everything. One of the things that Emacs really stands out, one of the reasons that I still use Emacs even in environments where I might be using something else to edit my text like IntelliJ, is because it has all of the text editing features that you want, all of them. And if it doesn't have it, you can build it usually pretty trivially. So yes, Emacs is extremely bloated, and it has everything you could ever want and a lot of things that you don't want. Oh wait, there's also, let's see, there's a snake. I tried to play this earlier, but it doesn't respond to the arrow keys. I don't know how to.
You play that the text console?
I don't know. So among its many, I read this a bunch of times, and I didn't see that it said Yog Dog, but so one of the dumb. Actually, no, this is kind of nice. Emacs has a terminal built into it. It's a terminal emulator. It doesn't actually, well, you can do something interesting. You can do this. Let's see. And I am inside of Emacs. What's that? No, actually, they're all kind of they're all getting sucked into the term. This is why. So I don't actually use this program except when I want to show people that I'm running Vim inside of Emacs, because this one is not a particularly useful terminal. I will show you a different one though. It's called Shell. Feature. Oh, did you want me to get that back up there so you could take a picture of it? If you want feature bloat, Emacs has term. It has shell. It has eShell. It's got multi-term and it's got end-term if you want to choose your shell. The one I use most often is just called shell. And the difference between this one and term is that this one's a little better integrated into Emacs. it's not nearly as useful. If I tried to run Vim inside of this one, it would look horrible and it might break everything, and so I'm not going to. But it works, as you'd expect, and it can run, most functions. You don't want to run things like top or Vim or anything like that in there. And so the obvious question is, why would you want to possibly run shell inside Emacs? After all, you've got a terminal on your computer. And there is a good answer to this, and this is the reason that I do it. Let's open a project, and let's open a shell. And so I'm going to, Emacs has a built-in sort of multi-file search thing, but for fun, I'm going to, just as for the sake of presentation, I'm going to do a search for the word. This is a medical thing. So I'm going to look for the word patient, and it's going to go nuts. It's actually a pretty slow emulator. So again, there's some things that you don't want to use it for. But normally, if you went to your terminal and you type this in, it's like, oh, there's too much. Now I have to pipe this through less and work through it. One of the awesome things you can do in Emacs, which I don't know why every terminal emulator doesn't have this, is there's a key binding for going to the previous prompt. So I just jumped up to where I typed the command. And now if I want, I can select that text that I just created and copy and paste that into something else. I don't have to do that. I can just start using Emacs commands right here. So I can say, okay, well, I want to find visit 6. And this is essentially the same sort of Emacs interface as you have when you're editing files. So anything that I ever do inside of this terminal, I have sort of the Emacs text editing capabilities, and I use this all the time. You don't want to try to remember what MySQL's file dump syntax is to dump out like a small table but too large to do by hand. So you get 1,000 rows and you want to copy that into a text file. You can open up a MySQL console in Emacs, work with it that way. You get Emacs autocomplete. You get, and then you can take your table, copy and paste it, do some text manipulation. So that's why you'd want to do something like that. Let's go back to here. So the point here, this picture has absolutely no context with this slide. This is just my 9-month-old son. He's still new and shiny, so I had to put him up there. He's eating avocado, I think. But there's an important point in the slide, so ignore the picture, is that Emacs presents a unified user interface, which is a good and a bad, but the good part of it is that everything in Emacs is text-based. Everything in Emacs is accessible by all of the things in Emacs all of the time. So you never, if you've used an IDE, you know that there's this IDE feature here, and this IDE feature here, and this IDE feature here, and there's every time you want to use a new IDE feature, you kind of have to learn a new interface and learn the buttons that use it. And there's not a lot of crossover knowledge that happens from feature to feature. Whereas if you're working with something that presents a unified interface, and the Vim guys already know this because Vim works similarly where everything is just text, you always have all the tools you know. You always know how to navigate. You can always go down by pressing J, and you don't have to reach over for the mouse to figure out how to navigate through. So everything is consistent, and your learning can be, you combine your learning, you build on top of your learning, rather having to learn little micro interfaces for every little functionality in your editor. So as an example of this, one of my favorite Emacs programs is called DurEd, and it is similar to a program that I don't think most people use extensively called NetRW in Vim. I don't know if one sort of inspired the other, but DurEd is a little more advanced. So what we have, this is my presentation folder. What we're looking at, this is actually just a file browser, and this is one of the reasons the inability to escape Emacs is partially caused by DurEd, because once you've used DurEd, you very infrequently choose to go instead to your command prompt in order to move files around or navigate directories or browse through things. So there's key bindings for moving up directories, and there's key bindings for, you can move down directories. You're basically given the LA view of every directory. You can mark files and then do operations on all the files you've marked. You can quickly delete files. You can copy files. You can mark files by that match a certain regex. So now I've marked all the PNG files, except for this one for some reason. Oh, no, it is marked. It's just under the mouse. What else can you do with Duret? I'm not going to go over all the features. Just suffice it to say it offers a very compelling sort of way to browse through files. It can be mouse-driven. I can, click on things. But it's also entirely keyboard-driven. And again, unified user interface, because it's keyboard-driven, you already know all the commands to move up and down. And you know all the commands to do the things you want to do. And then you can learn the additional commands that are particular to this, which are always just a shortcut away. That is Duret. And here's the real cool thing about Duret. So we're going to do something. Let's see if I can pull this off. So there's another program called Find Duret. And what it does is it asks you for find arguments. So we're going to find all the files here that match the name contains patient. Okay, and the screen's a little small, but here they all are. So what we have, instead of a view of a single directory, it's giving me the same sort of directory level view, but from the results of a find command. Now, what I could do here is say, I've decided that we're going to rename patient to client, right, because they pay. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to substitute patient for client and hit enter. And it's going to tell me, oh, of course, this isn't actually a text file. These are a list of files. You can't edit them. Or can you? So there's a wdird mode. And if I do that, I can do my same substitution command. Notice that Emacs is doing the right thing in terms of capitalization. So for a refactoring project, it works pretty well. If it's lowercase, it changes to lowercase. If it's uppercase, it changes to uppercase. So I've just renamed all my files. And then I committed that change, and they all disappeared. And then I'll just do my git status and see that we've added a bunch of files with client in their name and lost a bunch of files with patient in their name. So again, unified user interface. I use the same find and replace tools on a list of files that I would have used on text in my editor, and renamed files in an arbitrary depth in my directory found by a find thing. And so there's a few things to learn. There's a lot of stuff going on here, but the point is that once you've learned the basics of the editor, those apply to every task that you're doing in the editor. And because it's kind of a bloated piece of software, there's a lot of things that you can do in the editor, and you'll replace your old workflow where you had to remember fiddly syntax and things that you don't use every day and you can't remember without looking them up. You're going to do them by rote, by instinct, by the tips of your fingers. So here's here's a little bit of an aside, another thing that it's going to get back to the point of the talk. That when I was young, we were lucky enough to get a computer in our household when I was about 11 years old, and I just loved playing away at that thing. And it ran MS-DOS like 3.3. And I was convinced that somewhere hidden in the depths of MS-DOS were all sorts of like neat little hidden programs that did all sorts of fun and cool things and little games hidden. And so I sat in dir in every directory and tried to find cool things. And every file that had like a cool sounding name, I'd execute it. Most of them weren't executable, but I'd type them in anyway. And I was actually very disappointed to find out that there is nothing cool in DOS. Absolutely nothing. That is a business software. The one exception, I guess a fairly large exception, is that BASIC was on there somewhere. And that kind of kickstarted the whole thing. But a short while later, I got this calculator that you can't really see here on the right. But this is the HP 48 GX is pictured. I had a G because I couldn't afford the GX. But this was the coolest calculator ever. If you've never played with this graphing calculator, you can actually get it for your Android or iPhone phone now. I don't necessarily recommend that you do that, but like as a kid who has a lot of time in their hands and just wants to tinker with stuff, this was the calculator. It was so cool. The first cool thing about it was that it used reverse Polish notation, where you put numbers up on a stack, and then so you put 6 up, and then you put 7 up, and then you hit plus. And there's all sorts of reasons why it's cool and why it's sometimes more convenient than standard notation. But the cool thing about it was that when you know that you have a sophisticated piece of technology, when you can't add 2 numbers on it when you first take it out of the box. So you hit 1 plus 1 and you get an error. And it had an infrared thing that was used for file transfers and for transferring programs and things. But you could get a third-party universal remote program and actually learn. You point a remote control at it, and it would learn the infrared signal and remember that. And then you bring it to Spanish class and shut off the teacher's TV while she was teaching. And so yeah, it was an awesome thing. And the cool thing about it is that it's depth. There was so many things inside of it and so much stuff to discover. And it came with a manual like this thick. And there was just like weird things you could do with it that had nothing to do with why you had a calculator. And I've always liked software that does that. And I think that this was the piece of software until I found Emacs. And really the depths of Emacs are unplumbable. So if that may be a total turnoff to you, but to me, the idea that I will never be able to know all the weird, wacky things that Emacs can do, something that someone added to it 20 years ago and nobody's touched since. There's a feeling like you're doing software archaeology when you're inside of Emacs, because there's just weird old things that just kind of worked their way in there and never got out. But I think the difference. We talked about bloatware, and I put up the picture of the Word toolbars, and again, you have the advantage of Emacs having been designed for this sort of level of depth and customization. And so when you open Emacs, you're presented with this empty. Well, it's got some comments on it, scratch buffer, and it doesn't look or feel like bloatware. The addition of new stuff doesn't impinge on your ability to do the stuff that you want to do. It's all hidden away, but it's immediately accessible. If it's something you use every day and it's something that you're used to, you do it by key binding. If it's something not, then you do it by name. And if it's something that you really have no idea what to do, you can search through the function names or something like help apropos. We'll just do apropos, and then find things that deal with case. And then this is just everything. And there's different versions of apropos too. But anyways, I'm getting off topic. So one of the wonderful things that's hidden inside of Emacs is actually one of the coolest calculators that you can find on a computer. So let's open that up. And what's the best thing about this calculator? It's reverse Polish notation. So this calculator is not a toy calculator. This is not the calculator that comes shipped with Windows. This is a full programmable, if you have GNU plot installed, graphing calculator. It does algebra. It does more things than I know how to do. It's something that I don't use often enough and I always want to learn is you can actually, if you've got a stack of numbers in a text file, you can use any of the arbitrary functionalities of this calculator on that stack of numbers without actually going into the calculator. You can do things like, and once again, I don't remember what the calc command for sign is, but I can say, well, it's calc sign, and I just took the sign of something that was close to pi, so I got close to 0. And it handles large numbers fairly well. Let's see that number wrap. So again, I actually use this all the time. Unfortunately, I'm a little bit ashamed to say that most of the time I use this for addition of large numbers, not single digits, but it's there. It's actually a very nice calculator, and it's there if you want it, and if you don't want it, it stays out of the way. The other program that a lot of Emacs people love Emacs for is called org. Org is huge. Let's see. I'm gonna go up. Org mode. So here's the documentation for org mode. You can see that it's, again, a mini program inside of Emacs, and this is the documentation for it. So it's quite large. What it is a, it's a to-do list. It's essentially, but what it also is a fully configurable to-do list with the full power of Emacs behind it. When you're editing your to-do list, you have all the Emacs bindings that you already know and love. And if it doesn't have a feature that you want, unlike Toodaloo or Remember the Milk, which I use on the side, you can add them yourself. And it's got an insane amount of features. You can embed code inside of org mode and execute it, so you can have documented code. Some people actually do their Emacs startup in org as a form of literate programming, where they have Lisp code interspersed with org comments. And actually, GitHub, let's see if we can get this. So somebody's Emacs starter kit, and it's not this guy, I think it's this guy. It's all based on the concept of, this isn't his GitHub account. Maybe we can get to it. Yeah. So this guy's starter kit is based on the concept of literate code. So all of his starter kit, all of his Emacs configuration files are in org files. And GitHub knows how to render. This one's not interesting. Let's find a better one. Starter kit bindings. It's not going to work for us. But GitHub knows how to render org code as it would Markdown. Oh, so here you go. So this is actually, so this looks like your standard Emacs Markdown, or sorry, GitHub Markdown rendering. But if you look at the raw code, it's actually org syntax. And as a matter of fact, this presentation is being done in org mode. So it's just a to-do list. So the basic feature is that you have sort of nested lists, sub-item, and then you can expand them and contract them and do whatever. So that's that. Where were we? Oh, so if that is not enough stuff for you, Emacs very recently, as of the last 1 or 2 versions, got a package manager, which is really great. And it's really great for more than the fact that it makes packages easy to install, but it makes package dependencies easier. And when package dependencies are easy, that means that someone who builds a string manipulation library for eLisp, because eLisp string manipulation kind of sucks, everybody can depend on it. And all of a sudden we're building, there was some of this going on prior, and one of the things that makes some of the Emacs programs interesting is that there's a lot of sort of low-level programming libraries built into Emacs, and people build on top of them. So there's several packages that use the Emacs comment library, which does communication with a subprocess and shows a prompt, and that's used for your Ruby inferior Ruby, your Ruby REPL, your Python REPL, your Lisp REPL, and Shell and eShell. But at the time, if they didn't add comment into Emacs, you either had to distribute it with your program or tell people, oh, first you need to install this. And then what a package manager provides, importantly, is this dependency management, so people can build on top of others. And we're starting to see this happen a lot. So there is now a decent string manipulation library for Emacs. There are some data structure libraries for Emacs. So the programs that people are coming up with are getting more sophisticated. So here's a 2048 game is the first one up here if you're into that sort of thing, which I am. And so there's quite a few of them here. So it's an active community. Here are the ones I have installed. Again, quite a few. Here are the ones that are built in. Again, quite a few. So if you just want to find a way to waste a lot of time, this is totally the editor for you. Which does raise the question, Emacs, all the things. And again, I think that a lot of people frown upon Emacs for trying to do everything. And there's Twitter clients for Emacs. There is a built-in program, a news reader called GNews, and it also doubles as a mail client. There's 2 other mail clients for Emacs, of course. You can send email without having the particular mail client. Let's see. Here, I'm going to send an email. I won't. So there are some people that live very religiously by the idea that they're never going to leave Emacs for anything. And there is sort of that tendency, again, because of the comfort you get to, because of the unified interface, that where Emacs fits, you will naturally start to use it. You'll use term less and less, and so on and so forth. But you don't have to Emacs all the things I'm here to tell you. So this is for the Vim people in the room. What is Emacs evil? I was this close at one time. I was flip-flopping back and forth between Emacs and Vim, and I was, it's like, Emacs does so many cool things. At the time, I was working at a place where we did all of our development over SSH on servers. And are we doing on time, by the way? When is this over? Okay, so I gotta talk a little bit faster. No, we're getting close to the end. The point being that I kept on switching back and forth, and Vim was such a nice, like, well-packaged editor, and everything was perfect about it. But Emacs did all these sort of nice things, and it had this mode where it like transparently edit files on a remote server, but I could still launch it on my local machine, so I had like local clipboard use and everything, and like copying and pasting from a file on a remote server into a file on a local on your computer is actually a really nice feature, and so I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and so I thought, well, what can I make Emacs do the things that that I like about Vim? And the answer is sort of. There are actually 3 Vim emulators in Emacs. Actually, they are VI emulators, and the big one at the time was called Viper, and it just didn't achieve it. And I got really close to switching full-fledged into Emacs from Vim because of Viper, but I couldn't pull it off, and I switched to Vim, and I did a whole lot of work to make Vim do all the cool things that I thought Emacs was doing, and then it just didn't feel right, and then someone came out with a program called Vimpulse. And Vimpulse, for my money, is the best Vim emulator for any text editor out there. I can't say that I've used all of them. I've used Code Mirrors, I've used SublimeText, I've used Eclipse, I've used IntelliJ. Evil is really great, and one of the cool things about Evil is that it doesn't stop at Vim, just emulating Vim. It actually brings some of the Emacs mantra into it, so the extensibility is more of an Emacs-like extensibility. And I'll show you some of the consequences of that. But first, I'll just show you that you have, so right now I'm going to do, what happens when I press J? It's going to run the command evil next visual line, which looks like this. So J is down, so I'm not lying. I have been using Vim mappings the whole time, K for up, and L, and H, and I can, let's see, change N, retype this, and I can, let's see, Shift V selects the line. So all the things that you have in Vim are here. It feels almost exactly like Vim, including the very important, I don't know why people bother shipping editors that don't have block editing. I use it all the time. And in fact, Evil's Vim copy of block editing is way better than Emacs's native block editing. So it also has this Vim-like mode line, so you maybe saw that I did this earlier, but it has this nice little bonus where I can say, let's substitute, well, it's not doing it for me, because I forgot the S. It'll actually give me a preview of what I'm doing, which is kind of nice. But that, same syntax as you get from the substitute command in VI. Searching is with / searching buffer and question mark. So again, to a person who's trying to pick their first editor, asking them to learn the entirety of Emacs and the entirety of Vim, which you need to do to use evil and Emacs together is ridiculous. But if you find yourself in the very maybe unusual situation of having two editor lovers and not being able to choose between the two, evil kind of bridges the two in a very nice way. So that's my rebuttal to the concept of Emacs has horrible editing commands and the key bindings are horrible, and that you have the flexibility and freedom to do things the better way, which in this case is the Vim way. Here's what's cool though. So this command, you don't need to worry about the specifics of what's going on here, but what I'm defining is the concept of a little word. So Vim has the concept of words, and you can use words as chunks of text. So if you delete a word, it deletes one word, and if you hit 2 and then delete a word, it deletes 2 words. In evil, you have the option to define what these are. So the evil little word is, well, let me show you what a little word is. So I'm going to type a camel case. So camel is a little word. So if I said that there's a concept called a little word, and I'm going to bind it to LW using the evil binding. So when I type LW, it's going to traverse a little word. So if I say change little word, it changes up to the camel case, and then I can do. And it's a generic term, so any of the movement commands will operate on it. Delete little word and just LW, that doesn't seem to work. And it works with snake case as well, so word. And however words are defined, little words will also be defined. So if you're doing Lisp, we use what's called kebab case. And does the right thing. So I think this is a really interesting melding of the concept of VI, but the flexibility of Emacs. This is actually also possible somewhat in VI, and I'll show you how you do that in a little bit. But this is another really cool thing. It's always been a real annoyance to me ever since moving to both Emacs and Vim that every time I delete something, it shoves it in my pasteboard or Vim and Emacs both have weird antiquated terms for them. But and the place where that's really annoying is when you want to replace something with something in your clipboard. And any modern editor, your usual editor is you select something, you hit paste, the thing you selected goes away, and the thing you pasted goes in there. So you can do that over and over and over again without a problem. But in both Vim and Emacs, there's this functionality. So let me just say 1, 2, 3. So if I want to, and in evil, I don't know if you know, in Vim you can say yank in YI and then double quotes. That works in evil. So if I try to select this and then paste it over, well, that worked fine. But if I want to do it again, it put in 2, and that's because when it deleted the 2 before, it put it in my pasteboard, and I don't want to do that. Well, there's a way around that, and that's you send it to the null clip region, which has like an underscore. So then I hit some weird thing like, I think I have to prefix the command with quote underscore, and by this time it's too late. I've already lost interest. So what I've done is define a new evil operator called evil destroy, and the only thing it does, it's exactly the same as evil delete, except that it sends it to this register that's just kind of the black hole. And then Emacs has this concept called advice, where you can wrap any of its built-in functions with a function of your own, and it can either come at the end, it can come at the beginning, it can go around it. So we're going to wrap the real evil delete that says that if, let me get the text, sorry about how this looks, let's see if we can, that if the thing that we're deleting is only white space, even if we just did a regular delete command, don't put that in the clipboard. So when I'm like, oh, I need to move this, oh, but I left an extra white space here. Now anybody who's used Vim knows that, oh, now when I paste, I'm going to paste this white space first, and then I got to remember the command for pasting through history. Well, no, because we've wrapped evil destroy in this command, when I delete white space, it doesn't bother putting that in the clipboard. And then this evil destroy replace thing is the concept of pasting into an area without copying the stuff that you're copying over. So now when I yank the 1, now I'm going to do a different command. I bound it to Q. So Q in quotes, and it replaced 2 with 1, Q in quotes, and it replaced 3 with 1. This seems like a small thing, but I use this all the time. And I highly recommend that, that you implement this. This is doable in Vim. I don't understand this code, but apparently this does it. So if you want this code at the end, come and see me, or give me, I don't know, I'll get it to you somehow. It's actually, it's on Stack Overflow, look up change paste motion, and the idea is that you can do this with motion keys, which is kind of the important thing. So in one, replace in quotes, you can replace without. Yeah. So while we're talking about Vim, so coming again, switching back and forth between Vim and Emacs, and we're done at 2:30, you said? Oh, it's almost out of time. I will rapidly go through it. I do want to say that the evaluation of text in Emacs is possible in Vim if you define this, and all this is saying is evaluate the current line of text. And I bound it to the same thing that I do. So put this in your Vim config, and what you can do is, let's do it. So if I want to do something like this, no remap, J. So I'm gonna, So now I've made my change to my Vim config. I don't need to source this file. I don't need to restart Vim. I hit Control-X, Control-E, and now J always goes down 2. So you get that for free for coming to this talk, even if you never use Emacs. Okay, so very quickly, why would you not want to use Emacs? Well, unified user interface, again, sometimes text isn't just pretty enough. You're stuck with always text. There's, we saw that there's ability to show pictures and things. But there's some interesting new editors coming out that try to change our concept of what being an editor looks like. And sometimes you just need visual indications that are available. Sometimes basic features are just not as simple as they should be. I feel like you should be, some things should just be standard. In Emacs, they're not. And spell check is an example of this. You have to install an external program, then you have to install the enable the spell check program, and you have to configure it, and then it might conflict with your things. I don't think that this is the Emacs learning curve. I think it looks more like the Visual Studio version where you have to get over a considerable hump, but once you do, everything else is sort of at your fingertips. However, when people ask me, unless you're a fidgeter and unless you like to tinker with things and unless you just want to explore it for the fun of it, it's going to take you a long time. I now feel like I'm swimming against a current when I have to use Eclipse to edit some code, and whenever I can, if I need to do some real text manipulation, I drop that, I open the file in Emacs and I do it that way. But getting there takes a while, so you can become extremely productive, but you need to have the time on your hands. It's got poor defaults, but there are options for that. The OS that you program is not the best of all languages. It's a good stretch better than Viml. Although Tim Pope just released a implementation of Lisp that compiles to Vim's language, if you want to play with that. And again, the little word thing that I showed you earlier, you would do that in Lisp with this. There's no question about it. The mapping in Vim is awesome, and Emacs doesn't have it. And it's not, when I had a Java job for a while and I used IntelliJ, Emacs has some IDE functionality. It's starting to get added to the editor, but quite honestly, I don't think it's going to take off. I think people use it as a text editor, not as an IDE. When I was doing Objective-C, I was using Xcode. I tried to make Emacs work, but when you've got autocompletion and on-hand documentation for these enormous frameworks, an IDE is indispensable. Why not Emacs? People tell you that the startup time is a problem. It's really not. You start up Emacs once every several days. And in fact, if you start Emacs without a bunch of special configuration, it takes this long. And even if you start Emacs with extensive configuration, So I have extensive configuration, and it takes that long. So it's not that bad. The other reason is the Emacs pinky is exaggerated, and I showed that you can use your Vim bindings. And don't fear Lisp. It's a beautiful language. If you're judging it by its parentheses, that's really a book by the cover. So there you go. That's it. There's no time for questions unless you want to hang around or see me afterwards. But thank you all for attending.